Yeah, let's go ahead, Terry.
Well, Lisa Davidson is joining us from the Disability Service Provider Network. And I really appreciate your being willing to take this time with us. And maybe you can do a better introduction of yourself. I didn't want to start with Beaver Dam Alder, not with what you're doing now, but at the same time, you were on the Women in Government Board, and I think you did our leadership training. Am I remembering that correctly?
I did not have a chance to go through the course yet, but it's still on my list.
Dennis, there you go.
Boy,
She
but you're
missed
still
out.
successful. Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, but if you don't mind giving us a little background of you, and then launch us and tell us what you're doing and what your work is, please.
Sure. I'd be happy to. So thanks, Terry, and thank you, Dr. Dresang, for the invitation. First of all, doing my own little research on this class, I want to just thank you for your commitment to lifelong learning. That's also very important to me. And so I look forward to opportunities like this as long as possible. Learning something new every day is very important to me in my personal and professional life. So I just wanted to give all of you kudos for your engagement and participation that I aspire to that throughout my life as well. So a little bit about me. So you mentioned Beaver Dam. So yes, I'm coming to you live from my home in Beaver Dam in Dodge County, where my family and I have lived here about 21 years. And my background, I moved from California to Wisconsin in 1998. And since that time have been able to have a front seat into public policy and Wisconsin becoming the center of the political universe since that. Sorry. I thought I had that all taken care of, but I didn't. You never know when someone's going to show up in your neighbor's yard. So as I was saying, so starting my career working in the state capitol, working in the executive office for Governor Thompson, and then moving to some other positions in state government, including working in the state Senate. I've been fortunate to be able to take that knowledge and take those relationships into the nonprofit sector, where I've had many positions where I've been fortunate enough to work with volunteers and advocates around Wisconsin to really look at how can we make Wisconsin a better place to live, work, and play. In particular, looking at how can we make Wisconsin a healthier place to live, and how can we improve the quality of life for all of our residents. And so in my most recent role here at the Disability Service Provider Network, I've been able to move from working in public health to access to care, and now working in the long-term care space. I'm sorry, just 1 second, please.
That's all right. This is what Zoom is all about. We're fine with it. Especially working from home.
Zoom. Yep. I apologize.
Hey,
It's
that's the way it
okay,
is.
Lisa, we can't hear what you're hearing. So
I'm so glad. So in my current role at DSPN, I was able to take on the role as CEO in April 2020. So I think we all know kind of where we were as a state, where we were as a society at that time. So, for me, it's really been a journey in terms of moving into a new area in terms of knowledge, being able to work with amazing members that provide services to our most vulnerable, and being able to cultivate some new relationships. So with that, what I wanted to do today is, at the request of Terry, be able to share with you a little bit about who we are and what we do, and be able to answer any questions that you might have. So I'm going to pivot to another room, and then I'll walk through the presentation for you.
The joys.
All right. So I think that I'm in a better place now where I think you can see me and hopefully hear me a little bit clearer.
Are you hiding in the basement?
Nope, I'm just around the corner in a different room. So thanks for your patience with that.
Yeah.
So real quickly, my presentation is going to walk you through the Disability Service Provider Network, a little bit about who we are, talk to you about the members that we serve, give you a little bit more information in terms of the state budget, since that's so important to us, kind of the mechanics of that, some of the key issues that we work on, talk to you a little bit about family care, since that really is the key program that my members are funded through. And then time permitting, which I think we'll probably have, I'd be happy to turn it back to Dennis and Terry and all of you if there's any questions. So if it's all right with you, I'd be happy to start, or if there's anything further you'd like to do to kick the class off.
No, go ahead. This is great. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Give me just 1 second here. Okay. All right. So I just kind of alluded to the agenda for what I wanted to share with you today, give you a sense of, again, who we are and what we do, talk a little bit about some of the broader work on the public policy sphere working in long-term care, but also give you some examples of where we are today in terms of some issues that are in front of us right now, looking at the future of family care and also looking at the regulatory structure for adult family homes in Wisconsin. So DSPN itself is a relatively new entity, incorporated in January of 2018. And we are really the culmination of two different organizations. Previously, Rehabilitation for Wisconsin, which focused on non-residential services, more of employment-based services for people with disabilities, and then also merging with the Residential Services Association, which, just as it sounds, provided residential services for people with disabilities throughout Wisconsin. So when we came together, we also were looking at, who are we going to be moving forward? And so those first few years before my tenure, under the previous strategic plan, I think one of the issues we struggled with was really clarifying our identity. So for me, the mission, vision, and values and our strategic focus represents the strategic plan that we put into place in fall of 2020. So we're going to be refreshing that on a 3-year cycle starting in next year. But to share with you the mission of our organization, that we exist to support and be a resource for member providers through advocacy and education resources so they can provide the highest quality and full array of services for those with disabilities throughout Wisconsin. Our vision is that we are the industry leader in advocacy and education best practices for all in the disabled community. And our core values that shape everything that we do: quality, inclusion, diversity, respect, and community. So I mentioned to you a little bit about our history in terms of DSPN coming together in 2018. But before that, we really bring together over 50 years of experience advocating for disability service providers. And so we're really proud to be the unified voice for all disability service providers, wherever decisions are being made that are impacting them and the people that they serve. And the people that our members focus on serving are people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And some of them have really complex behavioral needs. And so I don't have to tell you, but our members are very special people, and the people that work for them are very, very special people indeed. And so one of the key issues we're working on is to elevate the profession of caregiving, not only through increased wages, but also looking at what we can do to really codify the professionalism of direct care professionals. And so that is a work underway that will take probably a few years for us, but looking at the different elements of what we can do to really elevate caregiving as a profession and really make long-term care careers more desirable in Wisconsin. So a little bit about our member services. So who are the members that make up DSPN? I won't go through all of them, but really it's looking at the full spectrum of services for people with disabilities, from residential settings into non-residential, more employment-based pre-vocational supports.
Lisa, when you had your big
Yes.
conference last weekend,
Yeah.
would those type of people have been, those organizations had been the ones who attended your big conference?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for asking. So we are just kind of coming off of our annual conference, and we had almost 300 people there. And so I'm very, very proud of that. So we had our annual meeting in Stevens Point. And so you see the different type of members that are listed here. And yes, we definitely had very broad representation from what we have as a very diverse membership. And that is a strength. And so bringing together different areas of our membership, I like to have, in a perfect situation, we have about 92 organizational and individual members.
Wow.
And I like to have representation from all of them at our annual conference. And so we've been making a good progress towards that. But not only do we have members there, but we also have other stakeholders that are involved in long-term care services. And so not just the traditional kind of pharmaceuticals, but also partners like insurance, like M3 and Tricor, insurers who really look at what they can do to help providers minimize and reduce risk. And so it's a broad set of stakeholders that really come together that we work with on a day-to-day basis. And so, yeah, we were able to have a very successful conference and have a really well-rounded agenda of speakers and topics. And if you'd like, I'd be happy to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, maybe at the end. Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. So given that our members serve people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, they are already Medicaid eligible because of their disabilities. And so for us, the biggest kind of funding mechanism that we have for Medicaid is the biennial state budget. And so we know that the biennial budget was just recently signed into law a few months ago in July, when the weather was just a little bit warmer, right? But that is where we invest a significant amount of our time and resources, because our members really have the most skin in the game because they are solely reliant on Medicaid. Now, given the disparity in terms of what Medicaid pays and what the cost of services are, a lot of them have philanthropic arms, or they have other service lines working with, say, our Department of Workforce Development and Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. So looking for other ways that they can grow revenue, that is just the reality of the situation, because where we stand today is that the family care reimbursement remains inadequate. And like I said, there is that disparity. So given that, I just wanted to share a little bit with you, and this is probably information that you know, but real quick, the biennial budget, we come to that every 2 years, just like it sounds. But this is a significant document that really determines fiscal policy and has some standalone policy in it, contrary to what you do here. And so the budget is able to create new programs. It's able to create new revenue streams. And it also can look at, do we want to increase funding for existing programs? Do we want to eliminate programs? And so for us, with our 3 areas of strategic focus, advocacy is really our top area of focus, again, because our members are so reliant on Medicaid.
Are you the chief lobbyist for your group, or do you have a lobbyist?
Great question. So I am the registered lobbyist
Okay.
for the Disability Service Provider Network.
Okay.
And so there is a distinction. There's really kind of two types of lobbyists. One is called in-house. And so that would be someone like myself. And then there's also contract lobbyists. Contract lobbyists usually represent multiple clients, kind of within the same issue family. But an in-house lobbyist generally is looked at someone that has the ability to go more in depth in terms of knowledge and understanding, whereas a contract lobbyist is someone that has a lot of different interests. And so they can give you some expertise a lot of times that are more political in nature, and someone who is in-house tends to be a little bit more of a policy expert. So that's where I fall. And in terms of our advocacy, really where I've seen a lot of success throughout my career and what I bring to DSPN is a real focus on grassroots advocacy. I really believe that that is the way to really get things done and really advance public policy in Wisconsin, is you really have to have an audience of people around the state saying that this is something they want and making the case for why this policy is needed. And so you need to be able to have constituents make the case and talk about these issues in a localized way to their state representatives so that they can see what the impacts are back home. And so that continues to be a really big focus for us in terms of our advocacy. I can't do it alone. I am one person. We do collaborate a lot on our advocacy with other groups. But I'm a big believer in grassroots advocacy because I've seen how valuable it is and been part of a number of different campaigns where that's been a really key element. So some organizations kind of follow that same path. Others tend to be a little bit more lobbyist heavy, where they would have someone in-house and then perhaps have some contract lobbyists to help kind of complement those efforts. But that is currently the structure that we have within DSPN right now. So I am registered with the state and have been for a number of years working in other organizations. And so that process isn't too cumbersome, but like all things Wisconsin, it's very transparent. And so the Eye on Lobbying website allows you to actually see who is lobbying on what issues and how much money they are spending on those efforts. And so again, it's something that's a little bit wonky, but Wisconsin is unique in terms of those reporting requirements and our website. And so it is a way to have the process of policymaking be more transparent to the broad public, but also to the people that are in the business itself.
Well, I was sort of making a joke about being an alder in Beaver Dam, but having that kind of experience certainly makes grassroots. I mean, you have to worry about potholes and you're worried about everything else like that. So that kind of minutia, that kind of detail that people really on the ground, like I can see how that could be the grassroots piece that you bring to it. Experience like that. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Terry. I think that, the opportunity that I've had to be an elected official, to serve on boards and report to boards, all of that has kind of led me to where I am today. And I think, we all bring into our roles, those experiences. And I'm at a point in my career where I've been able to learn a lot from previous experiences, but most importantly, mistakes. And, being able to bring those learning lessons into where I am today, which is a really fun and exciting role, much more than just advocacy. But yeah, it's been great to be able to tap into not only those experiences, Terry, but also those relationships. And I'll talk a little bit more about that too. So really quickly, looking at the state budget process, and again, this is reflective of the most recent state budget that was signed into law in July. But just to give you a sense, because we're going to be starting this process again next fall, it's crazy. It seems like it's always ongoing. But you see there that there's really kind of 5 key elements of the process. You have state agencies that take their time putting together what do they need to fund the priority programs established by the administration. And then from that, the governor has a chance to look at that and determine what else would he or she like to add to that document. That's where it becomes a little bit more political and more reflective of some political priorities. After that, after the governor formally introduces the executive budget, then it goes into the legislative realm. And that's where we see the Joint Committee on Finance really kind of take over that role. The Joint Committee on Finance is the budget writing committee and the state legislature. It's composed of 16 members, is bipartisan and bicameral. However, given that the given that the legislature is a Republican majority, they also are the majority on this committee. And so what the committee does is they hear from the agencies really to defend the budget requests. They also have public hearings around the state to hear from the public. What does the public like in the governor's budget? What don't they like? What are other issues that maybe weren't incorporated into the budget? And then they make revisions. And so they usually create an amendment. In the most recent years, they create a substitute amendment for the budget. And so what that is they basically say, we're going to create our own version. We're going to substitute in place our amendment in place of the governor's budget. And so after that process comes to a conclusion and they go agency by agency, then both the Assembly and Senate need to pass the same bill before it goes to the governor. And again, another unique aspect of Wisconsin is our veto review authority that the governor has. The governor can cross out sentences as well as cross out numbers. And so the governor usually takes a week or so to do that veto review, even though that process starts a little bit earlier. And so our fiscal year ends June 30th. And so we've been seeing the governor be presented with the budget on time and signing it shortly after usually the 4th of July holiday. And given that our state budget fiscal year ends June 30th, even if there's a couple of days lapse, we just continue funding state government at existing levels. So I've mentioned to you a few times Medicaid and how important that is to my members. I'm not going to get too wonky into the weeds, but Medicaid is a program that's jointly funded through the state and federal government. We have a contribution from the state close to around 40%, and then roughly 60% we're able to draw down from the federal government. And so Medicaid funds a lot of different programs, not just family care, but Badger Care. We have SSI, Family Care Partnership, a number of different elements of Medicaid that contribute to different programs and services. And so given that it's funded between both the state and federal government, that means that we have accountability at both the state and federal level. And so there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And so there's a lot of different partners that we work with, both at the state level and the Department of Health Services, and then also at the federal government level, mostly in the Department of Health and Human Services under the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, but also some different elements that fall under that broader umbrella of the Federal Health and Human Services Department. So I keep talking about the budget, but again, that really is the most important bill that we focus on at DSPN. And so we've been able to have some really good success in the most recent budget with increases to a couple of different key funding elements that are really critical to our members. And we had a provider rate increase that was funded, and we are able to continue that. We also have what's called a direct care workforce fund, and we are able to see another increase to that as well. And those are really key elements to us being able to pay staff more, be more attractive in terms of recruitment and retention. And like I said earlier, just being able to make careers in long-term care in Wisconsin more attractive. We also want to make sure that we find a way for providers to get to a point where they feel some certainty in their funding and can look to the future and make plans. I think we all know that Wisconsin's demographic data tells us that we are going to have many more people over the next 20 years need long-term care services. And so being able to make sure we have that workforce capacity to provide those services is really critical. I always say that access to services is access to quality of life. Many of the people that our members serve, if services were not available to them, they would be sitting at home and they would be isolated. They would not have stimulation, and that would be a very low quality of life. And that is not what we want. So some examples of some of our collaborations, we do a lot of work with our other provider associations involved in family care. You'll see those logos down at the bottom there, WHCA YCAL, the Assisted Living Association, and Leading Age Wisconsin. We're all invested in the future of family care and having the program be successful and sustainable into the future. And so we do a lot of work together in our legislative advocacy. We also have relationships and work together with the family care, managed care organizations. I mentioned our State Department of Health Services, as well as the Department of Workforce Development. There's also really a broad range of advocates that are involved in family care and disability rights. Legislators, every single legislator takes a vote on the budget, regardless of their committees. And then other national associations that we participate with and are part of as well. And so you'll see up here, this document is just one from our recent long-term care workforce study. And that is a study that we commission every 2 years. And it's become a really important advocacy document for us, for our legislative advocacy, asking for more funding. It's really important that whenever we have a request, that it's based in data. And so this document really allows us to take some key data points from the field to help make the case for why more funding is needed. So some more examples of how we work together. Again, you can see this is a memo that we sent to the legislature asking for specific funding amounts once we got to a point in the budget where there were some specific proposals that were listed there. I mentioned to you the long-term care workforce report. We also collaborate a lot on media interviews, talking about what's happening in the field, and also working with our members and making them available for media interviews as well. And then lastly, we also have a collaboration with the WICSEAL program, and this is the State Quality Improvement Program for Assisted Living. WICSEAL stands for the Wisconsin Center for Collaboration and Excellence in Assisted Living.
Mhm.
So I mentioned to you the workforce report. These are some of the key data points that we used and were successful in when we make our case to the legislature for more support. We see that we still need to have more capacity in terms of our assisted living facilities. We know that we have a high vacancy rate. We know that we need to grow more specific CNAs, and again, looking at that caregiver professionalization, and then looking at what we've seen over the past couple of years in terms of our staff vacancies. Obviously, COVID was extremely challenging, but we actually find ourselves in a position right now where workforce is even more challenging to manage as we climb out of the pandemic. The desire for increased flexibility and remote work, unfortunately, is not possible with all of the different positions, especially with people who are hands-on caregivers. And so it's really critical that we have the funding to be, again, competitive in terms of not only wages, but the benefits that we can offer to our staff. Those some
Lisa,
other
can you
ways.
say-
Go ahead. Yeah.
Can you, I mean, what is the average? If you went back to that slide, what's the average hourly for an adult family home for a skilled? I assume each one of these is
Sure.
different. But I mean, what are we talking? $13 an hour? Are we talking 17? We're talking, what are we talking?
Yeah, no, great question, Terry. So last fall, we actually had a survey in the field asking providers those very questions as we look towards our work with the Department of Health Services to establish a rate schedule. And so as you can imagine, wages are very dynamic. They change, they fluctuate weekly, monthly. But according to the report last fall, the average was $17.25, which is a big jump. And again, that reflects the different elements in terms of the workforce. We know that there's a lot of competition out there. You probably see the same billboards that I do and advertisements everywhere. And so a few years ago, yeah, it would have been 13, but that has had to jump for us to, again, try to remain competitive in terms of our recruitment and retention. And so $17.25 is reflective of what we saw last fall in terms of the average from that provider survey.
Interesting. One of the things with my mom, who's now deceased, but she was in her 90s and she had a long-term care insurance plan that allowed her to be able to pay family members so she could stay in her home.
Yeah.
And at the time, gosh, there certainly wasn't $17 an hour for it. Can't remember. It might have been a daily amount. But is that the kind of thing that you pay attention to on long-term care insurance stuff, where it allows someone from a family member to be able to be paid as opposed to having someone coming in from outside? Does that touch what you guys do at all?
It does. And so a real emerging area of services that my members provide is what's called community supported living or supportive home care. And this is where you have someone living in their own residence, where they have someone come in, and it could be as little as 15 minutes a day. It could be a few hours a day. It just really depends upon that person's individual needs, their person-centered plan. And so I know that type of arrangement is really popular and really of interest, and I'm sure will continue to grow. I think the idea of having family caregivers, IRIS, self-directed reports, supports, excuse me, they're all intermingled. I think the idea of long-term care insurance, while it's not always going to be applicable to my members, it's still, as you see the broader market and environment change, for example, looking at the emergence of home health care, right now that's kind of an emerging area in Medicare. But as we all know, once something kind of is tested out in Medicare and made available, it becomes much more mainstream in terms of its availability. So it's all interconnected. I think preparing for long-term care is going to see that's an area we're probably going to see a lot more growth in terms of insurance, looking at how you can supplement your Medicare insurance. So do you have coverage for long-term care services, whether it's in the home or in a different setting based upon your needs as those evolve and as you age? But it's all related. I think at the end of the day, it's making sure that people have access. But again, you need to have the people in place to provide those supports. And what we saw during COVID, especially, Terry, was people quitting their jobs and staying at home to take care of their loved ones because it was so hard to find paid caregivers outside of the family. And so that trend will probably continue, if not grow. But being able to recognize that work and be able to pay them for that caregiving, that's really important because you need to make sure that you are respecting the sacrifices that they have made and that they're able to provide for their families as well.
Thanks.
Yeah, you bet. So just a couple more things about, again, working together. So hopefully you've heard by now, I'm a big believer in collaboration. And so what we do is we really work across this broad spectrum of stakeholders involved in family care, really looking at, for me, collaboration is based upon where do we have shared priorities. Sometimes it's really, we have the same goal, but we may have some different ideas on how we get there. And that's okay. But looking at wherever there are opportunities where you have shared priorities, being able to collaborate, I think is a very, very strong message, especially when you're working with the state legislature and with the state agencies. If you're going together in a group, that really makes your case much stronger, especially when you bring in some non-traditional partnerships and you can demonstrate that you're working together on something and that you have the same concerns. And so just being able to, again, we have so much interest in the workforce because that's really the foundational issue right now in long-term care. that is access to services. For me, in my role at DSPN, representing the voice of disability service providers, really what I bring into all of my conversations with decision makers is that provider perspective. And really it's about making sure that, sometimes great ideas have unintended consequences. And if we can work through that on the back end before something becomes more of a, public policy proposal, being able to determine is something workable for providers, that's always the preference, and that's going to make something work well and be able to make sure that it's going to be successful. We also really work on transparency and how can we make sure that family care, for example, that we can have as much information shared with the public as possible. That really helps to inform decision making for families and guardians. And so being able to increase that transparency. I mentioned to you being able to have an environment that's desirable for long-term care careers. And then also looking at technology. This is also a real emerging space in long-term care services. And where appropriate, technology has a lot of possibilities to really preserve independence and autonomy in long-term care settings. It's not going to be for everyone, but where applicable and where appropriate, there's a lot of opportunity to, again, kind of increase that autonomy while also providing some relief for our workforce. An example of that would be something like an iPad, being able to stay connected to your caregiver, even if they're not physically in the same building as you. Thinking about the Alexa, if there's something you need, if you fall, being able to call for help. Then there's also remote supports, like something on the floor that's triggered if someone gets out of bed past their time that they should be asleep. Then it sends a notice, and so we know that someone is moving around and needs to be checked upon. And so tremendous possibility there.
Can you provide an example of reducing unintended consequences?
Sure. So there are a few. There's a bill right now that being introduced by some legislators in Green Bay in response to a long-term care facility deciding it would no longer be able to take Medicaid. So this doesn't necessarily affect my members, and this is not a member of mine, but an example is that they saw a media story about a facility telling its residents they were no longer going to accept Medicaid and they would have to find somewhere else. They would need to be placed somewhere else. And so in response to that, legislators came up with a bill that would require a longer period of what's called discharge. So ideally, the intent was to give the families, guardians, more time to find another place for their loved ones to go, to increase that from 30 days to 90 days. Well, unfortunately, this bill was constructed without any conversation with providers. And so one of the big unintended consequences is that you're extending the period of time when a provider would be unpaid. So if someone is going to be discharged and moved to another facility for whatever reason, there's a lot of back and forth that happens. And a lot of times providers end up being unpaid during that transition time based upon the circumstances. And so you're basically taking a bad situation and making it worse by extending the period of time where a provider would be kind of, caught in the middle, having to have an unfunded mandate to subsidize care for someone while you're trying to find an alternative placement. And so that's something pretty contemporary that I can share with you. I think also a lot of times what we see is regulatory proposals that are constructed without having the regulators spend time in the field. So for example, putting into regulations a request to extend a doorway by 2 inches. What does that look like in its practical application in terms of cost and disruption? A lot of times we're seeing more and more regulations that, again, unfortunately are these unfunded mandates, and providers they cannot simply handle that anymore. And so, what's the basis for these regulations? Why 2 inches? What's the basis for that? Is that based upon new wheelchair design? We're not understanding kind of what's the context here. And I think really the disconnect between our regulators and providers has really become problematic. We don't have regulators spending time in the field with providers to see things up close and personal for that context, but also having those, being able to call someone and say, what do you think about this? What would this look like? How much would this cost you in particular? And so those are a couple of examples.
Good. Thank you.
You're welcome. I want to do a quick time check. Where are we right now, Terry, in terms of our remaining time?
We've got about 20 minutes, 20 minutes left.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So again, I gave you some examples about our work in public policy. And so how do we do that? What are some of the key examples of how we're able to inform decisions? And so again, the Department of Health Services is really kind of our key partner. We have the Division of Quality Assurance, that's the regulatory arm. And then we have the Division of Medicaid Services, which is the funding arm. And so it's within those two divisions at DHS that we have the most relationships and the most interactions, I would say. And so what we do as an association at DSPN is we have standing meetings with the department. And so we have our residential representative standing meetings with our Division of Quality Assurance. We have the Bureau of Assisted Living that is within that division that has quarterly forums. This is an opportunity for them to provide updates to the broad membership of providers that fall under their authority. And there have been times where we've been asked to present at the BAL forums. We also have a new draft rule that's moving forward right now. This is called DHS 88. And that is the rule that governs 3 to 4 bed adult family homes. And so a really growing model, really the most home-like environment in terms of a long-term care setting. So I was part of the advisory committee that put together the revised draft, and then we'll continue to work on that all the way through into the legislative process once it moves over into that sphere. And where we're at right now is that's the example I was just speaking to about somewhat of the disconnect, is that we find the current draft, even though we're able to provide feedback, it still has a lot of really cumbersome and problematic elements that we feel are ultimately going to cause people to close. And that's not what we want. And so we're going to continue to be really invested in that. I see that there is a raised hand from Bay Creek.
Sorry, I forgot to change my name. This is Cindy McCullum. I didn't catch quite what you said. DHS is 88 is about, what about 3 or 4 families, or what? I didn't understand that.
Sure. No, I'm happy to go back. So this is the regulatory code for 3 to 4 bed adult family homes. So adult family homes kind of have 2 models. They have 1 to 2 beds. Those are certified by MCOs. Those are not regulated by the state. And then the second model, the one that pertains to this rule, is 3 to 4 bed adult family homes. So just like it sounds, an adult family home is a residence, and it can have 3 to 4 beds. There's a lot of rules that come with owning and operating one. And so this is a model that's very community integrated. It's in a neighborhood just like the house that you and I live in. And so it's a model that's really desirable for people in as a long-term care setting. And so one of the things that DHS recognized is that a lot of the regulations need to kind of be modernized. And so this is one of them. And so the department shared with us last year their intent to start that process of updating the rule. And so we've been really invested in that because of the implications. We also have a fair number of our members that do operate these types of environments. But at the end of the day, whether they are members of DSPN or not, preserving that provider network is essential to making sure that people that need services have access to services and that they are available to them. So I hope that speaks to your question. I'm happy to speak more to that if you'd like me to.
No, thank you. That was fantastic.
You're welcome. So some other things that we are invested in is you may have heard that under the American Rescue Plan Act, there was a significant amount of funding dedicated to states to strengthen their home and community-based settings. And HCBS is a term that you'll probably hear a lot. So home and community-based services in Wisconsin is the program that is basically the federal rule that our members operate under. And so what we have seen is that the ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act, the funding plan to improve HCBS in Wisconsin, we helped inform how that funding should be invested, and we've been able to benefit from it in terms of a grant opportunity to help recruit and retain workforce, but also, as I mentioned, some of the provider rate increases, and then also another project that we are working on to help establish a fee schedule. And so being part of the implementation of that plan remains really critical. We have some really significant once in a generation opportunity to help make those programs stronger. There's also been a number of family care forums that the state has put together. The family care program operates on a 5-year waiver. And so we are coming up against that schedule where our next waiver needs to be approved and in place by January 1st of 2025. And so to help inform what changes we may want to see in family care, there's been public forums, and so we have participated in those. We also submit written comments. And then, of course, we have informal opportunities to provide feedback as well. I mentioned grassroots advocacy earlier. Again, really one of the best things we can do as an educational and advocacy opportunity is to host legislators and bring them into the provider organizations so they can really see up close and personal who we are and what we do, and be able to bring them together with key staff to talk about things on a more intimate level in terms of operations, funding, the types of services, the footprint in terms of the communities that they serve. And then we also have a biennial advocacy day. And this is where we bring members together in Madison and give them some training and give them an agenda and messaging to take to the state capitol to meet with their legislators. And like I was saying earlier, really localize the issues so that the legislators know who the providers are in their communities, so that they know who they can reach out to for some guidance and expertise, but also really talk about the economic impact that they make and the impact on quality of life for their constituents.
Lisa, let me ask a question that stems from that, as well as the budget process that you talked about earlier. You've been around long enough to see a big change in the way that the budget process actually works, where the legislature, the Republican leaders in the legislature make a big deal of rejecting the governor's budget even before it hits their desk and moving right to the substitute amendment, presenting their own budget. It raises the question as to whether or not in this kind of very polarized situation, it makes sense for a lobbyist like you to even bother talking with Democrats. How do you deal with this situation?
Great question. So for me, one of the things that I enjoy most about working for a nonprofit is the issues I work on affect everybody. I really enjoy being what I call politically purple. And so for me, one of the best things about working on public policy that crosses demographics is the ability to work with everyone. And so at times that is challenging, depending upon, some of the political dynamics. But we have very strong bipartisan relationships, and we'll continue to do so. My goal is to have relationships with each and every of the 132 members of the Wisconsin legislature, and not myself necessarily having those relationships. Well, that's important, but the primary relationship managers should be our members, the providers back home. They need to know who their legislators are, and then give them some tools on building a relationship with them, making sure that they know the issues and they know how to talk about them, but then also giving them examples of how they stay in touch with them throughout the year. And so, you know, for me, I really try to leave the politics to the politicians. And, you know, even when some of those issues come up when you're in meetings, you really just have to ignore them and stay focused on the issues and just kind of let those slide. You know, you kind of learn after a while, you know, which legislators will probably bring up those things. And frankly, you really have to kind of ignore them and stay on point. A lot of times they'll try to pivot the conversation to something that maybe is not as relevant as what you want to talk about, that might be a little bit more political in nature or make a political comment. You just have to keep moving through it and not let that distract you. So having relationships with Democrats and Republicans is really, really important. An example of how that's valuable in today's environment is, you know, you have a split government. You have a Democratic governor. So all of the agencies are comprised of leaders that are appointed by the governor. And if you're having a problem with a state agency, it's probably going to be a little more advantageous to have a Democrat to reach out to a Democratic office and let them know that you're having a concern and see how they can be helpful to you. Versus a Republican. You can always go to any legislator when you're having an issue with an agency, but you want to be strategic because you don't want to burn bridges. And a lot of the staff at agencies that I work with are civil servants that stay in place regardless of any change in administration. And so having those relationships are really critical for examples like that. But then also, you know, you just never know how the political pendulum is going to swing. And so if you will only align yourself with one political party, as that swings back and forth and different parties take over as majority, you could find yourself really alienated and not invited to the table for public policy discussions. And that's a real disservice to the people that you serve. And so that's, again, another reason why it's really important to be able to have those bipartisan relationships. I think it allows you to kind of rise above the fray at times as well, and be looked to as being, you know, really grounded in data and not being involved in that political element.
Thank you.
Lisa, can you actually get legislators to show up for a visit to one of these 3 or 4 bedroom places? I mean, can you get a committee of 5 or 6 folks who actually come and go into the house and see what it is?
Fantastic question. The answer is yes, it takes a lot of work, but one of the things that we've been talking about with some of my partners has been looking at how can we see one of the committees in the legislature, for example, the Assembly Committee on Health and Long-Term Care Services. Could we do a road trip for that committee that would help be informative? Legislative committees do this all the time. They go on kind of fact-finding missions. And so this is something I'm very interested in making happen, whether it's having an informative hearing at the state capitol, which in itself would be valuable, where you just have some subject matter experts come in. There's no bill to be discussed. It's purely an educational hearing, but then also being out in the field, as I've said, is very, very valuable. And so, yes, it is possible. It's a little more cumbersome because with respect to my members, you know, some environments are more conducive to hosting legislators than others. You have to be mindful of the type of time of day. You also have to be mindful of the residents. And so, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of my members serve people that are very complex in terms of their behavioral health needs. So that type of an environment obviously is not going to necessarily be ideal to have some legislators coming in and out. So it's a little bit more challenging. challenging, but we do host legislators all the time. And so being able to host an actual committee would just simply be a little bit more work, but would have tremendous value.
I'm bringing it up because at the Barrymore this past weekend, there was a film festival, a lot of short films. It's called 53704, the zip code over here where I live on the north side. And one of their little 8-minute videos was from Options for Community Living. And they had 3 residents, 2 men and a woman, who obviously have lots of needs, but they are living independently. They bought their condo with this. And anyway, if you're looking for something to show sometime, I'll send it to you after this, because I'm sure they'd be happy to make that. They had the permission of the people and everything else. It's a really powerful, exactly what you're talking about. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, I would love that. And I think to that point, that's another element of a legislative visit that's really important is if we're going to have program participants be part of that, you need to make sure that you have approval from their families and guardians, even to take pictures with them. It's a process to make sure that there is approval given ahead of time. And usually the organization has kind of a blanket form that they have families and guardians review and sign ahead of time. But you have to be very careful to make sure that you're protecting people's privacy.
Thank you.
Here. All right, I'm going to probably just go through these real quick. So one of the questions that I get asked sometimes by my members is, what's the difference between the federal government and the state government in terms of, who's in charge? And so I put this together, just kind of giving you a layout in terms of, where is the federal authority? And like I mentioned, Medicaid is a great example where you actually have shared authority and shared oversight between the federal government and the state. But you can see that, there are 3 branches within the federal government. Just like we see at the state level, there's a lot of similarities in terms of we have the political appointees that are put in place by the executive branch. You have at the federal government and within the budget, you have discretionary funding, which, like it sounds, is really optional, like would be nice to have. And then you have mandatory funding. That is entitlement programs like Medicaid, like Social Security, like Medicare. And so when you hear our members of Congress and our United States senators talk about the budget and federal funding, you'll hear these 2 terms come up quite a bit. And so usually it's discretionary funding is where kind of the battles come up in terms of how much money do we want to spend on discretionary programs. And so some of the key agencies that we work with in the federal government, I mentioned to you, the Department of Health and Human Services is kind of that broad umbrella. We also actually work with the Department of Labor, and then we also work with the Department of Education. We actually have some of our oversight and programs that fall and have some shared jurisdiction amongst a couple of different entities. And then at the state, and I have this slide up because this comes up quite a bit too. So basically, the 10th Amendment is something to keep in mind, and it might be something that you're already familiar with. But basically, anything that's not delegated to the federal government and the Constitution then becomes part of the state authority. So if it's specifically laid out in the Constitution, then that means it's something that has federal oversight and jurisdiction. But if it's not, anything that's silent, that's where the states come into play. And so the states have obviously a lot of authority and that autonomy from the federal government. And so in terms of our state authority and where that comes into play, we have our state agencies and programs, we have licensing, program operations and regulations, state employee oversight, and then applying for waivers. And most importantly, at the state level is where we see the oversight of how to use our state tax dollars. And that is called general purpose revenue. And so using that money, that's where the legislature and the governor come into play. Waiver program. So I gave you the example of family care. And so that is a waiver program that is up for renewal right now. And so that process has begun of gathering broad public feedback before they submit the waiver renewal to CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And really some of the key elements you can see here on the screen is that you really need to make sure that you are providing services that are cost effective, protect people's health and their welfare, reasonable provider standards, and then making sure that we continue to focus on person-centered plans. And so making sure that the focus is on what the individual needs are, that we don't have one size fits all. I mentioned to you earlier kind of the timeline in terms of looking at the family care program. So where we're at right now is we have the department putting together what they want to see in the next iteration of the family care program. And so that will be going to CMS. And then what we see is that there will also be another period of public feedback that will be required on the federal level. And so each of these different points of feedback, it's really important that people provide that both formally and informally. You really need to go on the record so that you can say, look, we shared our perspective, and if they choose not to incorporate it, they chose not to incorporate it. But did we do everything possible? Yes, we shared written comments, we shared verbal comments, we talked about this on an ongoing basis. And so we'll see this throughout next year in terms of that stakeholder consultation, and then ideally have that new waiver submitted, reviewed, and approved so it can be put into place on January 1st, 2025. I just mentioned to you the process itself. It's also a really great opportunity to share your thoughts with legislators. Even though they don't have a direct role, they still have indirect oversight of these state agencies and family care in particular by how much funding they want to provide to the program. And so I always encourage my members that when we have messaging we share with the Department of Health Services or with the federal agencies, that also share those messages with our state legislators and with our members of Congress. And so these are the key partners that are involved in that process. I've mentioned that to you. Some things that we can change via some of our waiver programs, services, provider participation, and service delivery. And then where we're at right now is we're in the middle of our next steps. And so we've put together some key talking points for our members to use when they host their legislators on site. We also work with the media to do what's called media advocacy. And so being able to make our case through the media where they're able to highlight stories. And so I'd like to stop there, turn it back over to Terry and Dennis and all of you. I know that there were a couple of questions that came up in the chat. Do we partner with other associations to serve persons with disabilities other than intellectual and developmental? We do, although that is the key focus of my members. But there are other associations that focus on other needs. There's also other associations that serve more of what we call the frail elder population. And then on the national level, there are other associations that have kind of a broad range. And so for me, wherever I find that we have alignment in terms of our priorities, I'm always happy to have those conversations and to build those relationships.
You see the one at the top, do the changes in the voucher, I lost it. How do the changes in the voucher system affect the support of disabled students?
Well, the DPI and the special education funding is not an area that I have spent a lot of time in. I know that there are some of the other partners I work with that have, for example, the Board for People with Developmental Disabilities. What I do know is that there were some good increases in funding for special education, and people that I work closely with were kind of more taking the lead on that in that advocacy. But the most recent budget, we did see an increase because, again, when I talk about community inclusion and integrated settings, being able to make sure that students with disabilities can be in the classroom with their peers is really important, and that they have their own individual education plans worked with their families and their educators.
Do you run into much fraud? I mean, we hear a lot about Medicaid fraud, and particularly some of the nursing homes and some other things. Is that something you bump into at all?
It is not, fortunately.
Good. And you said it's a 60-40 feds state. Is that historically been about the same amount? Has that changed much?
Yes. It ebbs and flows a little bit. So during COVID, we saw that enhanced federal match went up a little bit, a couple percentage points. And as you can imagine, just a couple percentage points when we're talking about billions of dollars makes a big difference. And so we did see a higher federal match coming into the state during COVID. And as we've been unwinding that COVID public health emergency, that enhanced matching rate has gone back to where it was before COVID. I think I saw something about my staff. So we have 9 full-time staff, and our funding comes from membership dues. And we have a contract with the State Department of Transportation to maintain roadside facilities. And so we have funding between the two of those, mostly coming from our state contract. Medicaid expansion. So, that wouldn't have a direct correlation because, as I said, people with disabilities that my members serve are already Medicaid eligible because of their disabilities. However, a case could be made that Medicaid expansion could free up funding that could come to other long-term care programs. And so there could be an indirect path, but Medicaid expansion has not been something that we've really been on the forefront advocating for, just because our members are already, the people that my members serve are already Medicaid eligible.
Is there, and I'll let you go after this one, is there an umbrella, is this umbrella group copied? I mean, other states do what we do. I mean, is this a unique?
There are other state member associations like DSPN, and I get to work with them when we convene meetings. And so there are other associations that have different numbers, different names and such. But then there's also provider entities that are really, really big that exist in other states. And so you have some states where you have provider associations, and then you have some states where you just have a number of providers that come together kind of in an ad hoc way. There's different structures.
Yeah. Well, we have Peter Cameron coming on next at 11. So
actually, Terry,
I actually have to leave. I have another meeting.
Peter is with us, and I've made him a co-host.
Lisa, thank you so much. And I wish, I wish you were my daughter, taking care of all these all of us elderly people. We all want you to be our daughter. Thank you so much.
That's very sweet of you. Thank you for
much.
the invitation, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Okay, you too.
So we want to have Peter be a host here somewhere.
Yeah, I've made him a co-host.
Okay, Peter Cameron from the Badger Project is going to join us now. The Badger, I'll let Peter tell you what it is, but it's Wisconsin is, I think, is blessed with having alternative newspapers and nonprofit things like the Examiner, Wisconsin Watch, Isthmus, the Shepherd Express, Madison 365. There's a group in the inner city of Milwaukee that does a lot of information, much beyond the regular Journal Sentinel, State Journal, Lee Enterprises. And there's a huge importance for this niche of writing happening. So Peter, if you are still there,
Yep, I'm here.
Um,
I'm here.
Can you share your pictures or?
Yep,
Uh,
he's there.
My video. Can you
Oh,
see me? Can you see me on the video? I've got it turned on, I think.
I don't see it.
Yeah,
Dennis?
I see it.
Now we do.
If I talk, do I pop up? I can keep
Yeah,
talking.
yeah, we've got it set up so that
I don't,
the video should go with the speaker.
I see me and Dennis way too much.
Well, there's Peter right there.
Oh, there's Peter. Okay.
Yeah.
Got me? Okay.
Dennis, I don't know how to, you say
Let's
he's a
see, how do
host.
we, um,
You guys want me to jump into it while you try to figure it out?
You want to share your screen? Is that what you're doing?
Let's see. Do you want me to share I don't think you want me to share my screen.
If you have something for us to see, don't you have to do that?
I don't have any slides or anything. I'm just
Oh,
gonna
that's fine then. Okay, that's fine.
just gonna be my voice. You
All
guys
right,
want
well,
me to jump into it?
you jump into it. Keep going.
Okay. Great. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Peter Cameron, managing editor of the Badger Project here. So I've been doing this since 2018. We're 5 years into it. And I'm from Wanakee, Wisconsin. I'm from the Madison area, Dane County. And I was a lot of my newspaper career was in Pennsylvania, Scranton, Pennsylvania, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. I interned here at the Wisconsin State Journal, but I was out in Pennsylvania for 5 years doing daily newspaper stuff, and noticed that the staff kept shrinking, and we're struggling to do things and struggling to cover important stuff like what's happening in the state legislature, campaign finance, how our representatives are voting on things. We just didn't have time for investigative stuff as much, long form stuff. It was just a lot of day to day, which is also important, but I just saw a real need for that in daily newspapers. And so that's kind of why I started the Badger Project. I came home, my family's all here, and started, with the idea that I would do stuff that newspapers didn't have time for anymore, didn't have the people to do it anymore. So investigation, on campaign finance, on all sorts of stuff. And the original idea was to sell stories to newspapers. I thought, well, I'm creating this product, and they will buy it, and that's kind of a joke because they don't have any money. Newspapers don't have any money, so I quickly realized I just have to give it to them for free for the most part, and then I would beg them for donations. But so that's it gets worse in that for a while we were getting picked up all across the state. From newspapers everywhere were picking us up. All the lead papers in western Wisconsin, which is La Crosse and Chippewa Falls, and all of the weeklies out there, we were getting picked up in Racine and Kenosha, and that has stopped happening a lot for a lot of our stories. Newspapers are not picking up our stories much anymore, and I think it's because they don't have much local. There aren't editors that are there, that are in Wisconsin. I think a lot of newspapers are being designed. Well, I don't think, I know. With corporate consolidation, a lot of newspapers are being designed in, far away from where the newspapers are, because they're owned by national conglomerates. So that's not great. But filling some of the gap is they're popping up across Wisconsin, across the country. They're sort of local online newspapers that are doing the work of daily newspapers, and I think they're maybe even a little bit profitable, or they're able to function as a nonprofit. There's one in Wausau, the Wausau Pilot, if you're familiar with that. There's one in Racine, the Racine County Eye. There's one in Stevens Point, one in Fort Atkinson. So that's where a lot of our news partners have been there, and they're the ones picking up a lot of our stuff. PBS Wisconsin, their website picks up our stuff. There's a new, you might have heard of Civic Media, which is a new network of radio stations. They're trying to do news radio in sort of across Wisconsin, but in rural Wisconsin. One of the more well-known is As Goes Wisconsin, if you know Kristen Bray. Maybe you've heard of her before, maybe seen her on Facebook. But anyway, that their websites pick up our stuff. So we've moved more to online. as newspapers have, I don't know, just stopped running our stuff. I'm just looking. So the team this is mostly a one-man band. I have a retired journalist that serves as sort of an editor consultant for me. I always have freelancers and interns who work for me, and so to try to take some of the weight off my shoulders. But usually it's college students, so that I have them help me with more tech stuff that I'm not as good at. Let's see. I have a fundraising person as well that helps with fundraising. Let me tell you a little bit about our specific work. So in election years, we'll do lots of campaign finance stuff. So in the spring, when we had the Supreme Court race, we do a lot of just basically just publishing, putting up online who is donating the most to the candidates. And I mean, I think a lot of you know Janet Protasewicz fundraised just huge amounts and just overwhelmed the right-wing candidate. And interesting thing, I've written about this quite a bit. I think a lot of people don't know this, is that in Wisconsin we have campaign finance. We have limits on how much you can give to a specific candidate. So if you want to donate to Tony Evers for governor, if you want to donate to a candidate for governor, the cap I think is $20,000 per election. And if you want to give to a candidate for legislature, I think it's $2,000 for the Senate, $1,000 for the Assembly. But because of some court cases and some things that the Republican legislature did, there is no cap on what anyone can donate to a political party in Wisconsin. So you can give $1 million, $2 million, and J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, the billionaire governor of Illinois, has done that. He's cut checks to the Democratic Party of Wisconsin for I think $2.5 million. The woman, what's the woman in Janesville that has ABC Building Supply? Diane Hendricks has done the same thing, $1 million. And not only can you give that directly to the party can turn around and there's no limit on what the party can give to a candidate. So it's kind of a loophole through campaign finance law in Wisconsin. There used to be an aggregate. Some of you might remember there used to be an aggregate limit on what you could donate in a year. I don't remember what the cap was, but after you hit that limit, you couldn't donate anymore. The Supreme Court has said that is unconstitutional. It's a violation of your First Amendment rights. So anyway, we've done a lot of work there in looking at where all this money is coming from. Interestingly, this was something that the Supreme Court did it, and then Republicans changed law to agree with the court decision, but and Democrats have tried to close that loophole. You can put a limit on how much one can donate to a political party and how much a political party can donate to a candidate. Republicans haven't wanted to do that, but now Democrats are taking advantage of that, and that's why you see Janet Protasewicz raising so much money in the last election. And Democrats have really outraised Republicans in this state for the last few years, interestingly enough. So anyway, in election years, we'll do a lot of campaign finance stuff and looking at these big names, people that are donating, like the family that owns the Cubs is the Ricketts family, and they've put money into the Republicans, but who else is? I'm trying to remember.
Elon's.
I haven't seen Elon Musk. I haven't seen Elon Musk.
The Elon's, the cardboard.
Uline, the Uline.
Uline.
Yes, they're always donating a lot. The Ulines, and there's also there's a woman. It must be a cousin of his because they are Schlitz heirs. The Ulines are heirs of the Schlitz beer fortune. And there's a woman, her name is Linda Uline in Milwaukee, and she is a liberal donor. So sometimes you'll see Uline, and it's Dick and Liz are the ones that are sort of in Chicago, and they have the Uline shipping company or packaging company. But anyway, so that you can see that stuff on our website if you're interested in going back and looking at who's really dumping money into the state. We haven't done as much stuff with dark money. We have done some, and I mean most of that is coming from PACs and super PACs and things. But let's see, some other work we've done. We've done a lot of law enforcement stuff. Wisconsin actually is a pretty good state in terms of law enforcement, and keeping track of people. Wandering officers has been a big topic across the country. You know, a guy gets fired somewhere for doing something awful and then goes and gets picked up, gets hired somewhere else, and continues to do awful things like a Catholic priest. But we don't see that as much here. I've been able to track that some because the Department of Justice the State Department of Justice in the last 5 years or so, they have a list of officers that they call it negative separation. So they've either been terminated or resigned in lieu of termination or resigned prior to the completion of an internal investigation on something bad that they allegedly did. But that list is available to the public, but only through a public records request. So that's where I come in, and I've sort of tracked some of the officers that maybe shouldn't be in law enforcement that have done sexual harassment and within a department. But we've also done work noting that the total number of law enforcement officers in the state has dropped to record lows, at least since they've been tracking that number for about 15 years. So the number of total law enforcement officers in the state continues to drop. I mean, I don't think we're really seeing a problem in the state, except for maybe Milwaukee, where they had a huge homicide surge during the pandemic. But that's a whole nother issue. Let's see some other stuff. Yeah,
Peter,
sorry.
the one story I remember did get picked up with the rehiring, the wandering cop. You get pretty good luck with that. That story being picked up. Was it the guy from West Bend or who was that? Anyway, one of your stories that I know it was picked up by the State Journal, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, we've done several. There was one big one that we looked at. I'm actually going to do that again because it's been a while. But there was, I mean, in the post George Floyd era, bad cops were very in vogue. People still like to read about bad cops. So yeah, there was one that there are about 15,000 law enforcement officers in Wisconsin, and about 200 to 300 have been fired or forced out, and are still working. And a lot of those, when a law enforcement officer is first hired, they're on a probationary period where they can be fired kind of for any reason. They don't have any union protections, and if the chief doesn't like them, or if they're just not, they're usually new, and if they're not good at their job, the department will usually let them go. So a lot of these folks are just it's that kind of thing. It's not very nefarious. It's just they weren't very good at it. But some of them, some of them probably shouldn't be in law enforcement. I just did a piece on looking at northwestern Wisconsin, where there aren't many law enforcement agencies, and most of them, that was the case. It was just kind of little things where maybe they had a personality problem with the chief or the boss. But there was one guy who was accused of having, although they have plenty of evidence that he was doing this, was having a sexual relationship with one of his fellow officers' wives. So, he's not beating people up, but is that the type of person that should be in law enforcement? I don't know. That's not for me to decide, but we just get that out for people so they know who's policing the communities. And now that stuff is online. It's available for anyone to find it. And then it can be part of a community discussion if they want to have that discussion. An interesting thing we just did was there was, those of you in Madison might remember, there was a city councilman who, I think this was last year, his name was on a list of an Oath Keeper membership list. I think some of you remember that. And he resigned, right? This was a leaked list, probably a list that was hacked, given to a journalism group. And then the ADL and BuzzFeed and various news organizations looked at the list and to see who was on there. I got a hold of the list as well and was able to cross-reference it with the Wisconsin Department of Justice, who will tell you who's a law enforcement officer. I found at least three people who are active law enforcement officers right now. And you can read that story on our website. That I posted that last week. Two of them were in a town called Bayside, which is just north of Whitefish Bay, up the lake from Milwaukee. And the chief this was kind of stupid. He did not respond to me. I reached out and, wanted to give him a chance to comment, which we always do when we're writing about somebody, and he didn't respond. I called, I emailed multiple times. And so then, you put this story out, and it sounds like you've got guys that he didn't advocate for his guys in the story. And I mean, he doesn't know who I am. So I don't know. In my opinion, he should have talked about these guys. And there was another story that ran in an organization called the Wisconsin Law Journal, I think it's called. And that's where they sort of, he and the village president ran to this news organization and defended their guys there. But I wish they'd done that in my story, because I'm not interested. I'm not an advocate. I'm not an activist. I'm a reporter. My job is just to get facts out. So I wanted this thing to be fair, and I don't want, and I mean, there are people, whenever you put something out like this, there are people on both sides, and it divides up, and the anti-cop people say, look at this, and the pro-cop people say, this is a attack. And that's not, I'm not really interested in that. I want to just get facts out for people so they can make decisions in their own communities. But let me see. Let me talk about a few other things we've done. We get a lot of tips when we put out bad cop stories about an officer here or there that has arrests on their record, things like that. There's a deputy out in western Wisconsin, Vernon County. I think that's where Viroqua is, and he was working for a police department about 10 years ago, and he had a bad divorce or something, and he was arrested twice while he was a police officer for threatening his wife. He didn't do anything, but he physically threatened her, and he lost his job at the police department he's at. But he's a sheriff's deputy in western Wisconsin now, and we wrote about that. And now there's some discussions. The sheriff there is talking with a labor attorney, and he might be disciplined, he might lose his job, I don't know. And again, that's not our goal. My goal is just to inform people. It's not to get anybody fired. It's maybe this guy, I don't know, maybe this guy has rehabilitated himself, maybe he's a great law enforcement officer now, I don't know. But that information now is out for people to discuss. And I mean, that's a problem with newspapers going away. Somebody has to replace that, and that's what we're trying to do. Is get this information out there. I mean, one tool we use, that since we're not running in newspapers as much, is Facebook, and there are local Facebook groups, and so we try to post stuff in the Facebook groups so that people will find it. But I mean, I think people are finding our stuff, so that's been good to hear. Let's see. One other thing I wanted to mention was that we did a good story in the last month, and I'm guessing a lot of you are following sort of the Supreme Court, Wisconsin Supreme Court drama, with the folks on the right wanting Protasewicz to recuse herself from the gerrymandering case, and Justice Rebecca Bradley had written something noting correctly that Protasewicz had received multi-million dollars from the state Democrats, from the Democratic Party, and saying that she should recuse herself because of that. And went back and looked at, some of you might remember, there was a push in the last 5 years or so from retired judges and justices to have the Wisconsin Supreme Court adopt a rule which would where justices would recuse themselves when there is a case brought to them by someone that has donated to their campaign. And wouldn't you know it, Rebecca Bradley was vehemently against this rule and said it was a violation of First Amendment rights and things of the justices. And that's fine, but then she's just being a hypocrite. Ed Miller, a former professor emeritus of political science at University of Wisconsin Stevens Point, said she's being inconsistent, which was a nice way to say it. But that was, that's the kind of work we want to do, is just when these powerful figures are just BSing us, we want to make sure we get that out there. And I mean, the Cap Times picked that story up. That got some traction. Charlie Sykes liked it, and he was talking about it quite a bit. So that's kind of the goal, is I'm not again, I'm not an activist. I'm a journalist. I want to inform people. I want people to be better, well, just know what's going on, and so they can make better decisions in the voting booth and in their lives. Let's see, what else can I tell you?
Now, have you cooperated at all with like what I mentioned before, Wisconsin Watch, Examiner, up north, Madison 365? Have you guys cooperated on any project?
Yeah, quite a bit. Wisconsin Watch, they were the ones that actually released my first wandering officer story. It came through them. Early on, I was partnering with them more. I was using them, or I was working with them to get our stories out because we were small and not very well known. I mean, we're more well known now, so I don't really need them. So I haven't worked with them as much because we're able to get our stories read without them. I mean, every story we do gets blasted out to every news organization in the state, and some of them pick us up. A few of them pick us up, some don't. But we're still able to, even if we don't get picked up, like I said, we're able to get out to people, our stuff to people through Facebook, and I mean, I think everybody here knows it's easy to share links. So if there's something that people are interested in and care about, they share it with each other, and they'll do a lot of the work for us. So that's nice.
Your tips, where do they come from? Or your ideas for stories, just yourself, or?
My muse, they come from my muse. No, I mean, I spend a lot of time on, sadly, on social media. So I hear, I mean, especially on, say, Twitter, politicians are often complaining about things on there, pointing things out. That's a place I get ideas from. Sometimes we just get tips. People send tips in. I'm constantly checking various databases and things. That's something that, I mean, Terry, you probably know that when newspapers had lots of reporters, they would be checking all the various government channels and things. And that's just not, I mean, I don't, how many reporters does the State Journal have now? I think they had 30 or 35 at their height. Now they might have 5 to 10. I don't
Let's see, I had 4 assistant city editors and 32 reporters, I think, under me as city editor. That didn't count features, didn't count sports, didn't count copy desks, didn't count business, didn't count photography. Yeah.
I mean,
So,
there might be 10 news reporters there now. I don't, probably less.
Yeah. And
But yeah. And so, I mean, one thing I checked recently was, so there's just lots of reporting that happens to state government that isn't being watched anymore. So, I mean, campaign finance is one thing. We try to do that as much as we can. We look at lobbying, and lobbying has been very interesting recently because the Milwaukee Brewers have been lobbying quite a bit in the last 6 months, last year, for obvious reasons. They're trying to get, that state package. And so that's something we've reported. That was something we had that nobody else, nobody's checking that anymore. So that's something that we've tried to look for. Let me just, a couple things I wanted to say is that some of you have probably heard this before, but there's been at least one study done that says that suggests or found that when a newspaper goes away in a community, that borrowing costs go up at the municipal level, at the county level, or the village level, or whatever. And that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I've sat in a lot of school board meetings and county board meetings, and there's a lot of borrowing. They have to find loans for things, and if there's not a reporter in that room, then I think it's not even nefarious. It just might, the county board says, well, my cousin is a banker at the local bank. We'll just go with him because I know him. And rather than getting the best, looking around, getting the best rate or whatever. So that, I mean, that's sort of been a fascinating thing. And that's, I pitch to people that financially supporting journalism, it's not something that we're used to doing. I mean, we're all used to donating to NPR. I'm guessing this is a big NPR, PBS crowd, and I am too. But it's getting folks, I mean, especially younger folks, but everyone to get in the habit of donating, of financially supporting journalism is something that I think that's probably the way everything has to go. is that we have to move to a nonprofit reader supported model. And, maybe eventually we can get some support, government support, but that brings its own problems. Do we want government supporting something that's supposed to be keeping an eye on government? But anyway, just a pitch I make to everyone. I've, when I fundraise, my goal is obviously to fundraise for our organization, but it's also just to plant that seed in people's heads that this is something that it's, everybody knows that you can donate to the ASPCA or the Goodwill or whatever it is, but just getting that idea in people's heads that this is something that you can donate to, that you should donate to.
Do you have any stats on, you say that spending goes up. What happens to voting without newspapers? Is voting going down? Is participation in voting going down? Do you have you said anything? I haven't seen anything on that, but I just wonder if there's a corollary.
I don't have any stats on that. My guess is that, Trump is good for business, the news business. But I would guess that, didn't we have an all-time high voter turnout in 2000 in terms of the presidential election?
Well, I'm talking local. I'm thinking
Yeah.
when you're thinking about local government spending going up. If you're not having articles written about, about what's going on in the plan committee, people don't know, so they don't vote because they haven't kept up with it. I'm just wondering. I haven't seen anything on that. I'm sure there is some study out there. I've not looked it up.
I don't know. That would be my guess, is that voting was down. Yeah, how could you vote if you don't know what's going on? My parents live in Wanakee, and they get the Wanakee Tribune, but that it's fading away to nothing. There's just almost no reporting left, and it's all high school sports. And so, yeah, that would be my guess as well, but I don't have any data on that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, what else can I tell you? I'm ready for questions if anybody.
Okay. Well, if someone would like a list of the ones you mentioned, maybe we can go over it again. The Wausau Point, Racine, Fort Atkinson, Stevens Point, Civic Media, and the ones I mentioned at the beginning: the Examiner, Up North, Wisconsin Watch, Madison 365. I can put a list together on that and shoot it to everybody. The ones that I can come up with.
Of news organizations.
Yeah.
Yeah. We got Wisconsin Watch. I can't remember Up North News. It's just important to remember they do good work. Even there's a lot of right-wing media, and they're, it's very partisan, but they can do good work as well. Either Up North News or the Examiner is, I should have this at my fingertips. They are funded. It's partisan funded. So it's, yeah. I don't remember which is which.
North News is for sure. Yeah. And I can't remember.
They do lots of good work. They do a lot of, aggressively requesting, doing records requests of emails. Remember there was that, Jim Steineke was the former Assembly Majority Leader, and he had talked about that policing. There was a policing commission in the Assembly where some good bills came out of it. One was that police departments have to maintain a personnel file on all police officers. So if they get fired, that you can't seal that file. And there were, and I think there might have been a ban on chokeholds. There were several bills that were good bills. And Democrats kind of had to keep their mouths closed about it. They couldn't promote it too much because Republicans were willing to do it as long as Democrats shut up. And so, that's kind of where we're at right now. Is that if Republicans have all the power in the legislature, and Democrats, if they want to get anything done, they have to be quiet about it. And so, but my point was that I think Up North News had requested emails from Jim Steineke, and he had talked too candidly in an email about how this working group where the bills came out of was a political loser for Republicans. It wasn't something that would help them politically, but it was the right thing to do, and which was very, very interesting look into politics, and particularly Republican politics, about what he considered to be the right thing to do, but also that wasn't good for them politically. So anyway.
So can you talk about anything you're working on right now?
Yeah, let's see. Still going through this Oath Keepers list to see if I can find any other interesting names of note. There's we found a sheriff's deputy, or I got a tip on a sheriff's deputy that had 2 DUIs in a rural county, and we're going to write that up. And an interesting thing, so I reached out to the sheriff, and again, these rural sheriffs, they don't know who I am, and so they're wary. They think I'm anti-police or whatever. I mean, once they read our stories, I think we strive for fairness. So it's tough but fair, firm but fair.
Cindy has her hand. Cindy has her hand up to ask you something along that.
Okay.
And thank you. It's not about the Oath Keepers. It's about, I was wondering if you want to state an opinion about what you think the direction of the Washington Post is going to be now that it has a new CEO.
Oh, I don't know a lot. I can't talk a lot about it. I know that Jeff Bezos has been very hands off, or at least that's what the former managing editor was, the legendary Marty Baron. Is that his name? Marty Baron, right, Terry?
Mm-hmm.
Who was, if you've seen the Spotlight movie, they were the ones at the Boston Globe. Marty Baron came in from, I think, the New York Times. He was the head of the Boston Globe at the time. They broke the first Catholic priest story, and they basically, that's like a world-changing story that they started in Boston. So Marty Baron is this legend in journalism, and he just left the Washington Post. He just retired. I don't know. It's the New York Times has been very business savvy, and that they've diversified. I bet you there's a lot of Wordle players here. But they've done a lot of, they've done cooking. They've invested in cooking and the athletic and sports and games and the crossword, of course. And the Washington Post kind of focused on Trump, and Trump was good business during the Trump administration. I think people are a little bit tired of that now, and so the Post is not doing nearly as well as the New York Times is. They'll probably have to. I don't know if there's space for 2 major national papers. The New York Times just kind of vacuums up all this talent, and they're tough to compete with, and the news business is not a great business anyways. So, but the direction of the Washington Post, I don't know. I mean, they'll keep doing what they're doing. They've just cut a bunch of people, but they might have to diversify into different areas and do maybe a little bit. I mean, they do a lot of anti-Trump columns and things like that. And one thing we've learned in the news business is that it's what's profitable in the news business is telling people what they already think rather than what they need to know. I mean, I talk about McDonald's a lot, where McDonald's has tried to add healthy items to the menu, and when reporters ask the CEO, "Hey, where'd all those healthy options go?" and he says, "Well, people don't buy them. So why are we going to put salads on the menu at McDonald's?" And that's kind of, I mean, that's sort of a battle we're fighting in the news business, is that, Fox News is very profitable. I'm sure MSNBC is too. And part of the news, people like to hear what they already think, but giving people vegetables and nutritious news is harder to get them to eat. Harder to get people to eat their vegetables. So
it's a good metaphor.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's see. Is there anything? Do you have anything going on with Senator Johnson that could hold him more accountable for his involvement with the Trump election denying stuff?
I mean, I don't know. He it's somewhat surprising to me that he was able to win re-election. He was actually outraised in terms of campaign finances by Mandela Barnes, which is unusual for an incumbent to be outraised by a challenger, because he was just pretty unpopular. But he's a political survivor. He was able to just win just enough. We've done last year, in the election year, we did campaign finance stuff for both of them, noting who was donating to both candidates. One thing we've tried to do more of is that, I mean, Terry, did the State Journal did the State Journal have a reporter in DC when you were there?
No, we didn't.
A reporter?
No.
I mean, you just use the AP, but
yeah,
they're one thing that I know is important and that people like to read about is how our elected officials are voting on things, especially in Washington. And so we've tried to do it with Congress. With divided government now, there's not a lot of happening, so it's not as interesting. I just did a piece on there was an election, a vote last week to expel George Santos, and that was interesting in that it broke down mostly along partisan lines, but not completely. The expulsion vote was brought by New York Republicans because they're going to be in these tough elections next year, and he's like an anchor around their necks. And so there were some Republicans that voted to expel Santos. There were some Democrats, including Gwen Moore from Milwaukee, who voted to not expel him because of due process. I mean, he's got a criminal case coming up. There's also a House ethics investigation of him. Frankly, if I were a Democrat, I would vote to keep him in the House. I think it's better for them. Yeah, it's like Marjorie Taylor Greene wearing the Cruella de Vil fur coat. That's just great for Democrats. It just makes her look like she's a Disney villain. But yeah, as far as Ron Johnson, there was a vote. It was a trap vote by Democrats, but a vote nonetheless on. I think it had to do with dark money, and it was done before the 2022 election, and it was, again, Democrats know it has no chance of passing, but it's a trap vote. They want to get Republicans on the record voting against it, and it had to do with just more disclosure in campaign finance. The Supreme Court has been hostile to, to like Citizens United, I'm sure, but here no Citizen United, and they've been hostile to some things to I don't know, bills that would prevent spending in political spending, but they've been open to caps on things and to more disclosure within politics, and it's unbelievable that we don't have more total disclosure in politics. But on the right, I don't know, the left has a massive dark money machine now to counter what the right has. But that was something that we reported on, was that Ron Johnson joined all Republicans, or most Republicans, to vote against this disclosure bill. And that was, again, it was a trap bill by Democrats, just sort of a political messaging bill, but it's still one that all Republicans voted against. Super unpopular. And so that's just trying to connect the dots for people, show how their elected officials are voting. There was another trap vote on, I think it was insulin, a cap on insulin that Democrats did. And some Republicans actually voted for that. It was such a hot topic, they couldn't vote against it. But Ron Johnson, say what you will about him. He takes really unpopular stances, and he was able to win in, I still don't know how. Mandela Barnes made some mistakes, for sure.
That goes all the way back to Feingold, that whole thing with it.
Yeah.
Is there interest in positive stories about people?
That's a good question. I argue with my mother about that quite a bit. People say that they want, positive news and good news. I don't know, and I'm sure some people do. I don't. But what if it bleeds, it leads is from TV news, and I don't know that the majority of people want. I think they're choosing bad news over good news. I'm not really, I'm not in the business of doing crime stories unless it's helpful. And so, there's a quote from someone, I think, that I don't remember the exact quote, but it was talking about how journalism needs to be sort of aggressive, and you're not writing about good things. You're writing about what's not working, problems, and everything else is PR. So, that's what I'm trying to do is improve our communities. And but then again, sometimes I have done some work. So in Madison, there's something called, Madison's a very progressive place in terms of, obviously, but in terms of policing, they have crisis counselors embedded within the police department. They've been doing that for a long time. And other police departments law enforcement agencies are starting to copy that, because it saves money. If you can instead of sending cops out to deal with somebody having a mental health crisis, you can send out, you can be proactive with crisis counselors. And frankly, it's good they're doing it now. It's something they should have been doing 20 years ago. But we have written a little bit about that. So, I mean, the good news that I will do is, so in Madison, they have a program. I think it's called the CARES team.
Yes.
And it's
Yeah.
it's a, what is it, Terry? It's like an EMT and a crisis counselor, I think. There's no
Right.
police
And
off.
we had, it was run through the fire department, and we had the lieutenant captain put on last year to explain what was going on. And I'm sure you've seen that they've got money now to expand it beyond the weekend that it was doing. And so now they've expanded it a lot, and they've had great success with it. But yeah. So you did a story on that, on CARES?
We've done some, yeah, that would be the kind of thing that we would do in terms of good news, is because we want to promote that to other places.
Mhm.
I mean, we allow the city can do its own promotion for the most part. We're in the business of what's not working, but my goal would be, well, this is working at the city level. Let's promote it to the rest of the state. Milwaukee's trying to do something. They don't have any money, but I mean, Milwaukee probably needs it more than anyone. The state should probably give them some money to do it. But that would be where we would do, where I have done, where we would do sort of more positive news stories. Is here's what somebody's doing. Other organizations can do it, or other law enforcement agencies can do it.
As someone notes there, you need to be afflicting the comfortable. That's the role of
Exactly.
journalism, afflict the comfortable. You say you work with some college interns, do some writing for you. Are you finding them optimistic about the future of the journalism?
Um, I mean, they don't really know what they're getting into or what they even want, and that's fine. I I was on a call, sort of a call like this with the University of Wisconsin Journalism School, and they had, who was it? There was a editor from the New York Times, there was a reporter from the Washington Post, and and these are older people from the AP, and a lot of them said, apply with us, and I said, yeah, apply with them, but I mean, the way it used to work is you worked at your small newspaper and you worked your way up, and those jobs are just, I mean, there's some jobs out there for young people, but I you just have to have kind of an entrepreneurial mindset, and that's tough for a young person to do. Like in Wausau, in Racine, these are seasoned reporters that just went out on their own, and it's a lot of work to do that. But I mean, I think in Wausau, she's doing well. It's called the Wausau Pilot. Let me just take a little tangent here and tell you about what's happening there. She there was a state, he was not a state senator at the time. Some of you probably read in the New York Times or that in Wausau and Marathon County there was a big cultural fight at, I think, the county level about changing the slogan of the town. They wanted to say Wausau, a place for everyone, or Marathon County, a place for everyone, and it became a huge culture war thing. And there was a local sort of Trumpy businessman, and he was heard allegedly, but by multiple people, I think, after one of these meetings, and he referred to a kid, I mean, a young teen that had maybe spoken at the meeting, as he used a homophobic slur to describe this kid. The Wausau Pilot did not have a reporter there, but multiple people told them that he said this, and they wrote it up. And he's been suing them for the last year or two, and they've racked up six figures in legal fees defending this thing. In a lot of states, there are laws that protect against this kind of. It's called an anti-slap law, but we don't have one in Wisconsin. So if I wanted to sue the Wisconsin State Journal and I had a lot of money, I could just keep them in court. And the idea is not really to win, but just to break them financially. And that's kind of what this guy is doing or trying to do to the Wausau Pilot. Interestingly, the Federalist Society is involved, and they might, we don't know, but they might be funding this lawsuit, because the right-wing organizations like the Federalist Society and others are trying to build case law, create case law that makes it easier to sue news organizations. And so that's what's been happening in Wausau. She wanted me to write a story. I was afraid myself of getting sued. We now have liability insurance. She did not have libel or news media insurance when she got sued, so she's on the hook for all this. But I got the New York Times involved because I know the Midwestern editor there, and they wrote a story, and then she was able to raise $100,000, which will help put towards her legal fees. But anyway, that's just something that's happening in the state that you can Google that. There's a New York Times story about it. Kind of an interesting thing happening in the state right now.
Oh. Well, it's about our witching hour here. I want to they can find you on Facebook. They can find you on the web. Where should they look for you the best for the Badger Project?
Yeah, I mean, we have a Facebook page. You can follow that. Our web address is easy. It's www.thebadgerproject.org because we're a nonprofit. And just a quick pitch: we are I'm sure you're getting hit up by all the nonprofits right now. We're doing our end of the year fundraising. For every $1 you give us, we get an additional $2 from. We have news. It's called News Match. Wisconsin Watch does it. I think they run this program also, but we get a nice match. So if you give us $100, we get an additional $200. They'll match you up to $1,000. So yeah, we're fundraising, and I urge everybody to. I'm sure this is a journalism friendly group, but I urge everybody to financially support journalism wherever you can and as much as you can.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Dennis,
Thank you
I'll
very
turn it
much.
over to you. Turn it over to you, Dennis.
I'll turn it back over to you, Terry. You can
Okay.
talk about the next. No, this has been a good session. Really good.
I really
Thank you.
appreciate it very much, Peter, and thanks for being patient too when we're finishing with Lisa. Next week we have Bob Burns, who's the vice president of Trek. It's our last session. We're going to talk about e-bikes, policy, what's out there about bikes. He retired as a VP at Trek. They brought him back to run advocacy on e-bikes. So that's what he does. That's just what he does around the country. He belongs to a lot of different groups. Part of what he's going to talk to us about is something he gave to an insurance industry talk, because of course there's a lot of issues here with e-bikes and what's happening, where you're riding them, how fast people are going, the kinds of them, what's the ages, the demographic of people riding e-bikes. That certainly implies insurance liability and stuff. Dennis, if you fall off yours and you're going 35 miles an hour, which you could not possibly go on your regular 21 speed bike, except down Sunset Hill in Western Dane County.
I bike 35 miles an hour uphill.
Okay, Dennis. Anyway, that's what we'll be doing next week with it. And so once again, Peter, thank you so much. And thanks for everybody else who joined us.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.